One, I will say I was joking briefly with David as he walked by. I was clearly eating my breakfast. And I am starting to feel my age, I feel like, today. But I don't know I get to say that in this group. Based on relative age differences.
Making friends.
Living into my 40s, I'll put it that way. This has been a great time, an exhausting time, but a good kind of exhaustion. The kind you feel when you've done things that you don't get to do enough, and your muscles and your soul have been stretched to the other side. Thank you for this time together to be stretched and exhausted with you. Second thing I'll say, is there were some comments and some conversations last night about how the conversation and lecture went, and then David and I have sort of back and forth Q&A up here. I also want to say thank you to all of you for that opportunity. It's kind of rare that we get the chance, at least I do, to discuss things I really care about with people who also care about them, who I trust, and who are invested in the process of this conversation. I feel like so often in our lives, one piece of that is missing, and then it's kind of hard to have that full engagement. So I love having that chance to do that with David up here, and with all of you, your great questions, comments, and taking me all around scripture and all that stuff. It was just a real treat. Again, so thank you for that. I will say, if you feel like we run out of time sometimes to get your questions in, or we sort of wander off into the weeds, please let us know that, either during the Q&A, afterwards, or in social hour. We only have a couple days left. Let's make the most out of them. And if you have questions you've been sitting on, or things that you're just kind of percolating, say them out loud, or have your buddy say them. If you don't like talking in large crowds. And hopefully there's enough courage and gumption out there to get all the questions out we can. Okay? All right, those are my 2 comments. So today I'm continuing our conversation on forgiveness, and today we're looking at the question of what happens next. Let's say that forgiveness comes. What does that mean for what follows? Now, I first want to say, I'll move this quickly. I've been trying to make clear that forgiveness has these different pieces that it's trying to address. Some wrong has been committed, there's some resentment over this wrong, it could be a protest, there's some desire for reconciliation of some kind, of relationship going forward. And I think that each one of those pieces can be addressed in a different sort of way. You can get over resentment just by letting go of it. You can find a way through attention shifting, through re-narrating your life and your story to let go of resentment and never have forgiveness be a part of that. You can also have a reconciliation of a kind while holding on to resentment. I know some of us have been in that situation. We sort of just decided to keep chewing on this, but we have to go forward for whatever reason. And so the reason I'm putting out my sort of high-flying definition of forgiveness is I think that each of those pieces are important for forgiveness, but all these things can happen in other kinds of ways and other combinations. I had a thought. So there we go. So all these different pieces can be arranged slightly differently, and these different pieces can be achieved differently.
Anthony, can I see that slide last time? One more time.
I'll share these with everyone afterwards.
Oh,
I'll send out a PDF to the email last or whatever, so you can all sort of look at that later. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. One thing I want to say, I'm going to move to this first part quickly because I realized it was too long when I was looking at it. One of the challenges we have is that understanding of forgiveness I'm putting forward that I think meets a lot of our modern expectations doesn't necessarily fit with how folks who came before us would have used similar words or cognate words or had similar ideas. And so some of the peoples that influenced our tradition, Jewish, Greek, Roman, etc., had a whole lot of different ways of addressing wrongs done and feelings about wrongs that don't look anything like forgiveness. And we have some of these same ways today, right? Imprisonment, exile, execution, all kinds of punishments that sit on the table when somebody does something wrong. And those are a way of addressing a wrong. And could be a way of protesting when something wrong has been done, and as a community wanting to claim that and take that seriously. And there are different theories on punishment, that's a whole other lecture. Right? But we get this idea that there are other options on the table. In the ancient world, there was a focus a lot of times on exculpation and exemption through excuse. As I was saying earlier in the week, might prevent somebody to stop being angry because anger is beneath them. They might think of themselves in a superior status, and so they wouldn't get resentful because you're not worth being resentful over. That would show them them to be weak in some way. In the ancient world believed in compassion and pity, but often these were reserved for undeserved suffering. Something befalls you. They had a hard time understanding how you have compassion or pity for someone who brought this wrong upon themselves. I am not a biblical scholar, but I rely on those who are. Many of us in this room, we're digging through the text for Sunday, right? And as I mentioned last night, there's this guy, David Constant, who has this book for forgiveness, and he's technically a classicist. But he looks through these ancient Greco-Roman sources, the Hebrew literature, the Talmud, New Testament sources, etc. And he sort of says, listen, there's a whole lot of things going on here. Sometimes these words can be translated as pardon, cancel, cover up, forgive, and English renders these differently. He knows the same word in Hebrew, with the same word in Greek. And that forces us to do some interpretive work and make some choices about how we're going to use that language as well. Oftentimes, people think my sort of apologies required standard is a high one to clear. The ancients usually had a much higher standard for what happens before you can be pardoned or you're united to the community in some way. A lot of if-then statements, a lot of transactional pieces to it. And sometimes you're readmitted to the community, right, simply by performing the right rituals in the right kind of way. Which to me, again, is different than forgiveness. It's saying, well, who cares what your necessarily interior life is like? Well, we might. You did what you were told to do. You sacrificed the right thing the right way. And then we're going to count you as readmitted now. That's all we need to say about that. So, Michael Morgan summarizes the Jewish approach in this way. He says, forgiveness is one of a cluster of related concepts: law, sin, sacrifice, justice, mercy, compassion, repentance, atonement, purification, pardon, and then forgiveness. Second primary victim of wrong, so to speak, the one who is wronged, is God. The primary context for this is the divine-human relationship. Again, not to say they didn't understand the idea of forgiveness in an interpersonal way, that just wasn't the focus, at least the written materials that we have with us. Finally, the burden for action in the wake of sin falls on the sinner. So there's less talk about what you do to forgive someone and more about what you need to do to be forgiven, or what kind of restitution you need to take to make justice right. Okay. So I say that only to point out that it feels like forgiveness is being given sort of a limited role to play based on some of the conditions I put there. That is probably true, and true historically and in the text we're drawing from as well. Not everything is reducible to forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't always the response people have chosen. So I'm going to move forward then to the reconciliation topic, and start by talking about what it means to move forward to reconcile, but to place conditions on what that reconciliation is going to look like. And there are a couple of ways I see this happening. First, I want to head off, though, the thought that reconciliation just means a return to what was. This is often how we expect reconciliation to work, particularly when we're the ones who are seeking it and we've got something wrong. I think this is mistaken. I understand the impulse to want to say, I thought we were going back to the way things were, and I had this sort of, I thought you forgave me, and somebody sees me acting in a way that doesn't hold up to reconciliation. But I want to say, strictly speaking, there is no going back. Time flows in one direction. And as I've said throughout the week, when someone has committed some wrong against us, we generally have to see them differently than we did before they committed the wrong. I didn't know you were a person who was going to do that or do that again. So I can't go back to the person you were, because the person you were, I thought you were, isn't the same person anymore. Similarly, if you're surprised by my forgiveness, you might also learn something new about me. We don't want to go back to the way things were. We thought that I wasn't going to forgive you. So, again, for me, all of this theologically connects up what we say when we talk about being simultaneously sinners and saints. And then, after some wrong is committed, I say, we move from understanding that into an abstract way. That's how we often talk about it. We're all sinners and saints. We all do some bad, and we're all loved by God. Let's all go to coffee hour. general experience by preaching and others. But when we're in these relationships where somebody has wronged us, what is the general principle of us as sinners and saints? Something becomes something much more concrete and particular. I'm not just a sinner in the abstract. I'm the person who lied to you, who didn't fulfill my obligations, wasn't the kind of parent, or friend, or lover you expected me to be. So, if there is forgiveness and reconciliation, I'm going to say there can be conditions about what this is going to look like. This might strike us as odd. How are you going to justify putting conditions on a relationship when you said you're going to forgive me? This is my chance to lean into gifts and unconditional love a little bit. Around this time of year, the aisles of all the supermarkets are picked clean of Valentine's cards, right? Various poetry or something approximating poetry manufactured in a factory with all kinds of professings of love, unconditional and eternal. I've grabbed a few in my day, hastily, more and more as I get older, and make my kids go with me. We're all buying Valentine's Day cards now. Grab your cards, we're doing this. Okay? So often in our society, we have this idea of unconditional love, unconditional forgiveness. I just want to say, this often is a very confusing phrase to me. Unconditional love, unconditional forgiveness, all of this, just because it just sounds odd in my ear. First of all, I can't imagine a good relationship that's unconditional. I don't have any unconditional relationships. All the relationships I'm in come with some kind of norms for how we're going to behave and treat each other. That just seems to be my experience at least. I understand this kind of expression, kind of phrase, as an expression of commitment. You say, I'm fully committed to this relationship, I'm committed to work, and I'm going to keep working. That makes sense to me. My fear is it can also signal sort of indifference. I don't care what happens. And it's indifference towards oneself and towards the other person. I don't care about my own dignity enough to have expectations for myself or you. I don't care about you as a person enough to have expectations for you. And all of this relates back to questions for me about gift, whether gifts can be unconditional. You recall the first day I put this striking Frenchman up on the board, Jacques Derrida. I like saying French names, it makes me sound fancy, all that good stuff. Right? And as you may or may not recall, Derrida had this real issue with the impurity of gifts and the impurity of forgiveness. And his complaint, his issue was that when we give gifts, when we offer forgiveness with some kind of expectation or some kind of desire, something we're seeking or something we're expecting in return, he thinks that this pollutes in some way the act of gift giving, the act of forgiving. And so he really drives for what we need is a pure gift. When you give something away, not looking for anything, not expecting anything, seeking nothing out there. You don't like Jacques Derrida? There's another perhaps example. For those of you who also in the 90s, your children or yourself. I think the instinct in asking for pure gifts, pure forgiveness, unconditional expressions like this, is a desire to get out of a situation where people are controlling in the offering of gifts. People are giving gifts in ways that generate obligations that seem unfair or coercive. Or when somebody's giving a gift sort of half-heartedly and is waiting to take it back again. If I forgive you, you do something wrong, I can say, aha, I renege on that forgiveness. I don't think that's quite right. What I want us to think about is how I think about gifts. Is I think that gifts only make sense in the context of relationships and the practices that govern relationships. Think of it this way. Coming out of Valentine's Day. What if you went to the old Target, I have a shopping location of choice, and you loaded up on flowers and chocolate and cards, and you walked up to some random stranger and said, here you go. Happy Valentine's. Cool creepers. What's that? You're backing up, right? Now, at best you might think, well, this is a really nice gesture. Maybe this is one of those like random act of kindness kind of things. Maybe I'm being pranked on some sort of show. You're looking for a camera. It seems odd, right? Because you and the stranger don't stand in the kind of relationship in which that kind of gift would make sense. Similar to my example the other day of my children and Christmas presents. They expect Christmas presents because they understand that to be a part of our Christmas tradition. And that's something that family members do for each other. Now, their expectations for how many gifts they get, which gifts they get, whether or not I'm being honest when I say I don't have enough money for the gifts they get. All of that is something different. But the idea that they think this relationship comes with the giving of gifts in these ways strikes me as both conditional. This is a relationship we share, gifts are a part of that, and totally okay, right, good. So for me, this gets into the question of why giving a gift at all. And folks who want to think of gifts as pure and unconditional want to emphasize this idea that you can't have a reason why you give a gift. But I think there are all kinds of reasons we give gifts that are good and bad. Sometimes it's out of a sense of obligation, for good or for ill. Sometimes it's a ritualized expression, like Valentine's Day or Christmas. There are all sorts of reasons why we're both into these practices of gift giving. Sometimes we give folks a gift just out of gratitude for something done. A round of applause for excellent music or devotion leadership. I want you to have this, because in this relationship we share, you have done something that I want to recognize. I desire that you have this. Bring me some kind of joy in sharing this relationship and expressing it through this gift. So this to me is obviously the best reason we give gifts. Not just because we're obligated, although sometimes we do. We can't muster more than that. I was sharing with Charlie, I got a story of a mutual friend of ours. I'll say that. My buddy Mark, you'll figure out who it is. Not in this room. One day I got a thank you card from my friend Mark, after my wife and I got him like a baby shower present. So I opened the thank you card, and the card says, "My wife tells me that I'm a crappy person and need to send thank you cards. So here you go." Mark. My wife's probably right in some ways. And it's my favorite thank you card I've ever gotten. It was the sort of the most honest, fair, I'm giving a thank you card because someone told me I had to. Which is why my kids give thank you cards and why I do sometimes as well. Right? Or is this something, person in the back of my mind hanging over me, I'm doing this thing, I'm giving this gift, I don't really want to, man. Or when it comes time to give gifts to the kids' teachers, sometimes I'm giving them gifts around Christmas or the end of the school year because I'm like, I really want to say thank you for all the hard work you've done. Sometimes I'm like, crap, I gotta give them a gift. I give them a gift. Right? And sometimes I'm just giving it because I know that I'm supposed to do that. It's not as good of a reason, but still giving it, doing our best. But at our best, I think, in an ideal situation, we give gifts because of the relationship we have with others and for the sake of that relationship. That it marks in some way our commitment, our joy, our love in that relationship. And when folks start questioning the gifts we give, start picking at them, they aren't just picking at the gift or its quality or its worth. They're sort of picking at what the gift means to them, and how they're seeing it differently than an expression or a token of this relationship. So, my problem with the emphasis on unconditional gifts, be they human or divine, this is sort of an old medieval philosophical problem as well, called Bergen's ass or Bergen's donkey. The setup is this. You have a donkey who's sitting between two nice piles of hay that are equal in size, quality, taste, texture, everything is the same. How does the donkey choose which one to eat? The answer is, it doesn't. It's starves to death. Because you need a reason to do A or B. There has to be something there to say that you're doing something. So when we say that we give gifts without conditions, without reasons, or that God gives gifts without reasons or conditions, in some broad sense here, it doesn't make sense as to why God is doing that. Okay? Back to my question from before. Yes, God gives gifts. And I want to say, yes, there are conditions. Those conditions aren't me doing something, or me earning or deserving it on my own. What I was saying, the conditions come from the relationship that we share. Because God values this relationship, wants us to be a thing, God gives gifts. That's God's reason. God wants us to be a kind of relationship where God is the giver of gifts. The very gift of the relationship itself, the very gift of life and existence itself. So God has reasons. Okay? All right. Back to the forgiveness. So let's say we've decided we're going to restore a relationship through forgiveness. And I want to say that conditions can still be a part of this in a variety of ways, for a variety of reasons. Sometimes we put conditions going forward for the sake of the victim. Say I decide we're going to restore this relationship, I'm going to offer forgiveness, but I need to put conditions in place because I need to have signs that I can trust you again. I need to find some way to minimize the burden that I have to bear going forward. Because in forgiving you, letting go of resentment, and venturing forward in this relationship, I'm taking on some risks. I know that in the past, those risks have caused me harm and pain. And it's unfair to ask me to bear all those risks myself going forward. So we're going to do this thing together. And sometimes I think the conditions are there for the sake of the offender. Sometimes these conditions are there to help you become the kind of person you said you wanted to be when you apologize. Not punishment, although it can feel like that. My experience, my students experience my teaching as punishment. Right? Not just because of the quality of lectures, but like, oh, you're expecting these things of us. And you're doing it for arbitrary reasons. Well, at my best, that's not the case. And sometimes that is, you're right. But at my best, I'm trying to give you something, help you achieve something that I believe to be good for you, and I hope you come to see the same. Sometimes the conditions allow us to gain trust in ourselves. Training wheels or basic ski lessons. Another way to reaffirm your commitment from the apology and the relationship. I think that in these situations, there ought to be reciprocity. There's some fear about sort of the arbitrary position of conditions from the one who's forgiving. That can be a real problem. But there needs to be some sort of communication, conversation, sort of thinking about how the relationship kind of look going forward with certain changed conditions. The most obvious example of this to me are cases of marital infidelity. One partner has cheated in some way or another. They say, well, let's go, you've forgiven me, let's go back to the way things were. And you say, well, that didn't work for you and me in this relationship. So some things got to change. Late night meetings, the spare cell phone, whatever else is going on, that can't be the case anymore. And it's not because I don't love you and haven't forgiven you. It's because I do love you. I have forgiven you. Otherwise I wouldn't care. Cut you loose. And I would say sometimes going forward isn't necessarily the same kind of reconciliation or the same kind of relationship after forgiveness. And I'm leaning pretty heavily on marital examples because they're easier ones today. But for me, the prime example here are cases of divorce. Sometimes after marital infidelity, a couple decides to come back together and work it out. And sometimes they decide to go their different ways. Or one party decides to go a different way. It works out one way or the other. Now, I'm venturing into dangerous waters here. I'll try and be as careful and cautious as I can. I'm not gonna apologize in advance, I'll only apologize afterwards if you point out things that I did wrong. If I apologize before I do something, it seems like I'm trying to get out of getting blamed later. So, I'll save my apology for correction. Just as a general rule. We all do that, we all apologize before we do something, like, I'm sorry, before you like, give a speech. Don't apologize before. Right? That's just like avoiding. Like, apologize after. It's a chance to help you figure out what you did wrong. So, I'll save my apologies for later. So, what am I thinking here? Well, there's a lot of stuff out there on divorce, and sometimes I find it confusing, because I'm the kind of person who finds lots of things confusing. It is in my nature. This top one I find the most confusing, even though I understand the sentiment. This top one, divorce is a failure, is an end to a story. All stories have beginnings and endings. Right? I understand the word there, it all makes sense. But some stories are happier than others in my experience of stories. Some are more comedic, some are more tragic. And my sense is that people's experience of divorce is the same. By comedic, I mean there's a sense of release and freedom. Something good is coming out of this. What was happening before was bad. Sometimes there's a sense of tragedy. I don't see how it could be better to be divorced, but this is what we have to do. I feel like something lost here. The failure language gets tricky. I agree with the sentiment in the second one. Divorce doesn't make you a failure. Again, my experience with folks who I've known and come alongside who have gone through divorce, that there is a sense that some failures have happened. I'm trying to keep those two things separate. Being a failure is one thing, attaches to people, but our actions, our behaviors, our emotions, our responses, things done and left undone. My sense of my life from others is that failure doesn't make sense there sometimes. The reason I think these things are sort of out there in the ether is because there's garbage like this out there in the ether. A lot of times divorce in this country is treated as if it's an epidemic, literally entitled here. I think this is probably a pre-COVID thing. Nevertheless, there's this sense that divorce is a thing that's a bad thing that's happening in our country, but people have lost track of God, they're thinking about wine, I don't know, Roosevelt, country that used to be. There's all this stuff about how divorce is a bad thing now, there's more of it happening that's bad. That all seems very wrong and mistaken to me. So in response to that, I see a lot of this kind of stuff. Whereas I think that when relationships change, divorce happens, folks carry forward a sense that there was a failure. And if you can get to the point where you can see that it isn't a failure of an individual, and that neither you or your partner is a failure, I suspect you're getting closer to the road of forgiveness. And so sometimes when we reconcile with someone, when we receive their apology or their confession, when we move forward with forgiveness, we can't move backwards to any kind of relationship that looks the same as one that came before. But we might well move forward to a different kind of relationship. However, friendship, co-parenting, or even just mere dignity and well-wishing. Now, I use the word mere there, which seems like a sort of base bottom word. But sometimes that's a pretty big accomplishment. Right? Just to be able to get to a point where you see a person another sees you as another person, and not different in kind. To me, all of this counts as reconciliation. These are all relationships. These are all things that are made possible by some kind of shift, how you understand yourself, another person, some letting go of resentment, some desire to move forward under different terms. And I think all of this comes from the real and honest human limits on ourselves. Because of the kind of creatures we are, we can't be expected to bear certain kinds of risks and vulnerabilities, even if we might want to. I might want us to get back together, but I can't. The risk is too great. The energy cost is too much. The danger of myself and others is too high. There's just too many things that make this not the choice that I can make because of the kind of fragile creatures that I am. we are. My sense is that God is not quite as fragile as us. But I'm not God, so I'll keep on with that. I'm going to finish today thinking with you all about what it means to talk about failures to forgive them. Is it possible to say that someone has failed to forgive? Well, let me do my fun job of drawing distinctions all the time. When we say that we're required to forgive someone, if we say that, I think there are a couple of issues on the table. First off, there's sort of a normative question, an ought, should sort of question, right? Ought a person forgive for some reason or another? Am I obligated? Should I be committed to? Should I be expected to forgive? And to this, I want to say yes, under some conditions and some situations. I think I said in passing on the other day when we posed this in a question afterwards, that insofar as I want a relationship with the person to continue, I want it to be one where resentment is no longer present, then I ought to forgive. It's conditional. If I want this thing, then forgiveness is how I'm going to get there. If I don't want that thing, I should forgive. I have to. Even if you should, what if you can't bring yourself to actually do the thing that you think you ought to? Again, we're back to being humans again. This concerns our capacities and our abilities. And oftentimes we're in situations where we say, I really want to be in this relationship. I want to keep being your friend. I want this to continue. I know it requires forgiveness. I don't have it in me. This is, again, more of that sort of tragic but very real part of our life. And there's another issue at play here for me. Who, if anyone, can call you to account for forgiving or not? Or it gets even more tricky. Who gets to tell you you have an obligation to forgive? My sense is that lots of people could, but shouldn't. Right? My thinking goes something like this. There are situations in which the person who has apologized, the offender, might think, frankly, based on what you've said and where we are, you should forgive me. When the person they're talking to can't forgive them and they say those words, it doesn't sound like an invitation to do the things you're committed to. It sounds like an accusation, a demand, coercive. In which case, that person who's apologized might have to bear some burdens of their own sadness and lament going forward. When we get into wider and wider circles outside this immediate back and forth interpersonal, it gets even more complicated. I can only give my own sense of my own life here, that there are people in my life who I trust who tell me that I should forgive, and it's not a big circle. And usually folks who are telling people they should forgive are way, way, way from that circle. They're inserting themselves into a relationship that they don't have a part of. If they want to learn from that relationship going forward, and think about their own acts of forgiveness, their own relationships, by the grace of God, you go forward. But inserting yourself into somebody else's work of forgiveness and reconciliation seems inappropriate for a variety of reasons. So, that takes me back. I haven't gotten too far away, I don't think, from the prodigal son and this family of prodigals, I think. So you recall this elder brother, some of you feel like many sympathize with, stands there before his father and says these words in anger. Listen, for all these years I've been working like a slave for you, never disobeyed your command, never even given me a young goat to celebrate my friends. And the son of yours came back, he has devoured your property with prostitutes, killed a fatted calf for him. I don't think I don't quite get the anger struck by my own disposition that I expect this brother had. Did the elder son, the older brother, fail to forgive the younger? My hunch here is to say no. This older brother hasn't failed to forgive when he should have. Why do I say that? Well, recall, at this point in the story, the older brother has been out in the fields working all day, like he's done every day. He's a good son. He doesn't know what the hell's going on. Right? He hears it from a servant. You're having a party for your brother. He's like, that piece of crap? You're having a party for him? He didn't hear his brother say, I've sinned against you in heaven. He didn't see his brother, perhaps, his condition he's in. Didn't see the embrace, the robe, the ring, all the preparations that led to the party. It takes a little while to get a party going, in my experience. A lot's happened, and he just walked in on this. He has no idea what's happening. Additionally, there are different parties involved in all of the wrongs and harms that are at work here. It's unclear to me, at least in the story, nobody talks about it, how the younger brother has actually wronged the older brother. I think he has. Disrespecting him, their father, property, the life they share, their relationship as brothers. Sort of ran off, thrown that away. And so there's no sense in the story of what wrongs the elder brother might have felt he was justifiably forced to endure, and how the younger brother might respond. The older brother's saying those things to him. Nothing there. There. What is at play in the response you saw from the brother, though, right? Is the brother doesn't actually talk about himself and his younger brother all that much. It's all about himself and his father. So I like to play a little imaginative game here. What if we were to rewrite the prodigal son story and have the older brother say some different things to his father? You ought not forgive him because what he has done to you, he's just going to take advantage of you again. It's a little harder to condemn it right there, right? He's just going to do the same thing over again. It's going to hurt you. What's the plan here? What kind of signal does this send to others in our community that are wronged by his actions? They're going to think you don't care about what happens to our property, the future of our village, our following of Torah, our devotion to God. Our experience has been that God really cares about those things. There's been a whole lot of exile in our past for people who did things like this. Do you have anything to say about this, Dad? How will welcoming back change anything about him and our family? Are there any conditions or expectations that we should get in this cycle over and over again? We're running out of things to give to him to go spend on prostitutes. You might forgive him, but I can't. I don't think you can vicariously forgive like the same way. Just because my dad is forgiving this kid, do I have to? This was actually a real debate amongst our ancient Jewish sisters and brothers, the Talmud, about whether or not forgiveness was obligatory, when apology has been offered, when God has shown forgiveness. And there's no real decision on it, as in many cases. In these Jewish debates, right, there's a lot of back and forth about, is that right or is that wrong? Shouldn't the parties who have wronged each other work that out? Is it right for God to insert God's self into that? Declare forgiveness between people who haven't worked out that forgiveness between them? And I'll say it's a live question for me. I understand the impulse to say that God's forgiveness takes care of any wrongs we do and reconciles all of us. I believe that in an eschatological sense, but it seems slightly wrong in the sense of the lives we live here and now. Lead to all kinds of problems. These are my instincts. The problem, of course, is that the older brother says none of those things that I just had on the slide. That his complaints are entirely directed against his father's treatment and the alleged wrongs his father has committed against him. This isn't even about the younger brother anymore. It's about the older brother and the dad, and how the dad has done him wrong. So he demands an apology, or at the very minimum, an explanation for why the dad is acting the way he is, why he's treated him so poorly, in some sense, all of these days. This is where the story gets extra interesting to me. The brother is wrong, I think, in many ways. One of the ways he's wrong is in not attending the actual victims, the people who are apologizing. He's focused on himself, not the father, not his younger brother, their relationship. He's not going to care about the community. He's all wrapped up in himself. But I think he makes a number of errors as well. One of them is his sense that family is optional. What do I mean by that? The brother thinks that family relationships are ones you can enter into or exit out of. He thinks that certain behaviors remove one from the family, while others justify your inclusion in it. I've been here all the time doing work, therefore I'm the son. He's not even my brother anymore. These are optional. He doesn't deserve the title anymore. What I want to say is that the older brother confuses good and bad ways of being in relationships with the status one has of being a member of a family. I mean, those are different things. And that's one of the things that sets the whole story up. Jesus is accused repeatedly of being with tax collectors and sinners. The problem isn't just their behavior. The problem is that these folks are of a different status than others in the community. They are somehow below, removed from, no longer a part of the family, not even distant cousins, perhaps. So Jesus is hanging out with folks who don't deserve to be in the family anymore, and their actions show it, and they're getting their just desserts by being excluded. Jesus has a different sense of these things. You can't be out of the family. That's not your decision to make. Even if you're right, your behavior is bad. You want to work on it. Keeping those things separate. What I also think is particularly interesting and puzzling about this story is that while I and we often focus on the older brother, his various failures and flaws, notice that the younger brother thinks exactly the same way. We're going to get mad at the older brother for his mistaken understanding of status versus expectations in a relationship. And we should notice that the younger brother thinks the same thing. In the very beginning of the story, he thinks he can opt out of being a son and opt out of having his father anymore. He essentially says, Dad, you're dead to me. You're no longer my father. Let's wrap this up. Cash things out. Go our separate ways. I don't think you can do that. He thinks that certain behaviors remove one from the family, while others justify your inclusion in it. He also confuses the good and bad ways of being in a relationship versus the status one has. And you notice this particularly when he returns. The apology he recites twice, or at least 1 3/4 times. He doesn't think he can come back as a son. The best he can hope for is a new kind of relationship. We can't go back to sonship. Sonship's been lost. We're going to move forward in a new relationship as master and servant, ruler and slave. Which again, is sometimes how our relationships go. Look at the divorce example. I might forgive you, I might reconcile, we're not going to be partners anymore. No longer husbands, no longer wives. Something different has to happen. Sounds like that's kind of how it works. This is unexpected. But that's not what he gets. There's a rehearsed speech here at the top. I am loosely calling an apology, at least an acknowledgement that some wrong has been done, whatever motivations are behind it. And then how things actually shake out. The father sees him far off, he runs, then the son says to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and no longer worthy to be called your son. And then the father cuts him off. To me, it's important that the father cuts him off there. To me, it signals that his son saying what he says to that point actually is important for the story. And that what his son says afterwards is also important, because his father stops him from getting to that point. No. You're right, you sinned against me in heaven. You're wrong that you are no longer worthy to be called my son. Different things. So, I'm running out of time and I see snow flurries. Charlie nodded vigorously. We started late, just to be clear. So, tomorrow I'm going to keep going with the story and take another look at it and get us to think a little more about what the hell happened to this family. An older brother and a younger brother both had the same understanding of how their status in the family worked, what was expected of them. They both thought that if you do enough bad things, you don't get to be in the family. That seems like something's wrong with that family. Furthermore, I want us to think tomorrow about what's wrong with that father. My kids come to me because they think I only love them because they do good things, or they can only be a part of this family, only my son or my daughter, because they get good grades or achieve good things in life. Something has gone wrong with my parenting. I'm not sure what it is. Sometimes we are. We look at our own families and families around us. But something's not right there. My instinct is to say that there's something not right in this family. And that points us to questions about sin, and suffering, and evil in the world. We have a father with children who don't understand that father and their relationships to that father. Something's not right. So I'll close tomorrow by thinking about whether or not the Father also stands in need of forgiveness, what that means for our relationship with God, how we figure out what to do with all of our prodigal ways, our sin and suffering in this life. I'll do that in 45 minutes. So that goes. Thanks for your attention and your time. Go attend to the mountain.